higher consciousness, and in this video we're going to talk about the mind. What is the mind? And for scientists, it seems the mind still remains an object of mystery. They've been discussing it for years and they just don't seem to be getting any closer to the truth. And that's largely because currently the scientific community doesn't acknowledge that consciousness exists outside of the brain. It very much does. We live in an entirely conscious universe. So if you understand how the human system works from a spiritual perspective, it's actually not difficult to conceptualize how the mind fits in. And when I was going through my spiritual awakening, my team taught me about how the mind works very early on, because it's such a vital component in awakening. In fact, it's kind of the whole point. How you use the mind is kind of the whole point of awakening. And so basically, there's two main things you need to be able to wrap your head around to understand the mind. The first one is we are immortal, immaterial souls having a physical human experience on earth. It's the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is we live in a multi-dimensional universe. We are just existing in one dimension of a multi-dimensional universe. Okay, so let's talk about the first aspect, that we are souls having a human experience. So when we incarnate on earth, we take on a physical body, and this combination of soul and body is called an avatar. So I am an avatar, you are an avatar, we are all avatars. The tool of the soul part of us, the soul part of the avatar, is the conscious mind. So when you think a conscious, rational, logical thought, that is your soul thinking. But the body part of us owns a part of the mind too, and that is the subconscious. And that part of our mind is all about emotions, what you would call the baser emotions, like fear, shame, guilt, those sorts of things, which are really intended as survival mechanisms. And it's all about those sorts of emotions and sort of automatic responses. And if you think about the word subconscious, what you can see is it's talking about your lower consciousness. In other words, the animal part of ourselves. So that's two very important components of the mind. And then there are two more components. So it's a system that is built up of four separate areas. One of them is called the id, or the ego we tend to use on earth. I personally use the word id because that's the word that my higher self Sophia uses, and I understand it's the term that is used in Soul World, so I just try to keep consistency. And the id basically is a collection of beliefs that we start building up about ourselves from the day we're born. And between them, the id and the subconscious exert a lot of influence on our conscious mind. And a large part of the spiritual awakening process, sort of why we're here, what we're trying to do on earth, is to learn how do you rise above those two lower parts of our mind, the subconscious and the unconscious, which is the domain of the id. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is shed the ego, and it's something that's the term we use on earth, but Sophia, my higher self, she calls it subsuming the id. So you call it what you want, but basically the idea is to just really get rid of all of these beliefs, often self-limiting beliefs that we've collected around ourselves, and to actually recognize that we are souls and to operate with awareness using our conscious mind, rather than allowing ourselves to be directed by the subconscious and the unconscious. So that's the first stage of spiritual awakening. And then there's a fourth part of the mind, as I said, there's four compartments. And it's not really spoken about very much currently. It doesn't seem to be understood very well. But it's actually the main focus of spiritual awakening. It's sort of the ultimate goal. And it's the superconscious mind. So again, if we think about the word superconscious, we are talking about our higher consciousness or our higher self. And I often hear the mind being talked about as one homogeneous lump. So when I was at the beginning of my awakening journey, of course, I wanted to understand all of this stuff. And before I had the full connection to Sophia, now we just converse telepathically in conversation like you and I could do in a room together. Before I had that, I wasn't getting the information clearly as I would like, and I was having to do my own research, and I just really couldn't find a good explanation of how the mind worked. And partly this was because people are just talking about the mind and the body, when in fact it's really to do with separate compartments of the mind. And also I was hearing the term subconscious being used for when the superconscious was meant, but the two terms were being used interchangeably. And the fact is they're entirely different, and it's really important to understand the difference, because one is something you're trying to disconnect from, that's the subconscious, and the other is something you're trying to connect to, which is the superconscious or the higher conscious. Okay, so that's the four compartments of the mind. You have the conscious mind, which is the domain of the soul. You have the subconscious, which is the domain of the body. You have the unconscious mind, which is the domain of the id. It's a collection of beliefs that you start to gather as soon as you are born. And then you have the superconscious mind, which is the domain of your higher self. So now let's talk about the mind in the context of our universe being multidimensional. And basically those first three parts of the mind that I just spoke about are all based on Earth. So they are in this dimension with us. And of course, when we incarnate on Earth, we forget we are souls, we forget what we're here for. We just know ourselves by sort of our avatar's name. We just think of ourselves as a human being without really knowing what a human being is. And we lose access to the universal knowledge. But when we incarnate, we come here with a plan, we come here for a reason, but we forget what it is. So that's where our higher self comes in, our superconscious and our higher self. Your higher self is basically what in soul world is called your oversoul. It's the soul you are birthed from. And what happens is they remain in the higher dimensions, and they have full awareness, full consciousness of your plan. They know what you came to do. They have access to the universal consciousness. They also have a bit more of a view across our dimension. They can see other things that are happening. And they're your primary guide. So they are your little voice of intuition if you're early on in your journey, but you've got these little whispers of intuition, or they're the person typically who is planting signs in your environment or giving you those little frissons of, sudden fear, or you've got a little sense of clamminess, something's not quite right. That's all coming from your higher self. So the objective of spiritual awakening, the ultimate goal of spiritual awakening, is to detach for your conscious mind, the seat of your soul, to detach itself from our lower consciousness, the subconscious and the id, and then to deepen the connection, to build a pipe, to use a data term from my old days in digital marketing, data marketing. You're trying to build a pipe to your superconscious mind from your conscious mind, and you're sort of integrating the two things. So this is literally the definition of being spiritually awake, ultimately spiritually awake. Once you reach a point of 80% integration between these two areas of your mind, then you are considered by the universe to be enlightened. And this is the path that many of us are now on, is this path to enlightenment, or higher consciousness, as I call it. So there you have it. Basically, what is the mind? The mind is a system of four compartments, each relating to the different aspects of us, ourselves as human beings. And it's a shared environment where all of our various bits come together and interact. And the more you can gain mastery over the lower levels, the easier it will be for you to connect to your higher self. So I hope that answers your questions. But if you have other questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will try to answer them as always. And meanwhile, enjoy your journey.